In this lecture, I'll show you how to add images into the background of Blender 2.8, which is different than older versions of Blender. Background images can be useful when you want to use blueprints or reference pictures to help you model something. So let's press Shift and A for the Add menu, and let's go down here to the Image menu, and you can see that we can either add a reference image or a background image. Now the difference is that a reference image can be placed in front of or behind objects, whereas background images are always displayed behind objects. So let's add in a background image. And as soon as you click that, it opens up the file browser and you get to choose whatever image you want to add to the background. So we're going to go with my original car design side view. So I'll select that and press enter. And that's it. So this is what's used for adding in background images. Now if I add in a cube, you can see that the image is always displayed behind the cube, even if we place the cube behind the image. So it lives up to its name, background image. So let me delete that. And another thing to note is that the background image is added in aligned to whatever view you're in. So for example, I'll select that, press X and delete it. And I'll press numpad 1 for front view. Then I'll press Shift and A, and I'll add in another background image. And I'll choose the same image here. And there we go. Now these objects can be treated like any other object, meaning we can select it, press G to move it, S to scale it, or R to rotate it. So we have a lot of control over the scale and placement of the blueprints, which is great, especially for things like car blueprints, which you'll typically want to scale until they're at real life dimensions. So in this case, I do want to transform this because I added the side view blueprints in front view. So let me left click on that to select it. I'll press numpad 7 for top view, press R to rotate and hold control for snapping, and I'll rotate that 90 degrees like that. Now let me press numpad 3 for side view, and we can see our blueprints there. And if I go back to front view, you can see they're no longer there. So this blueprint is now officially set up. Now you'll notice when you mouse over the rim, a gizmo pops up. It gives you these control points which you can click on to scale things proportionally. And there's also an X in the center which you can click on to move this around. But again, I prefer the hotkeys by just pressing G or S to scale. Now one other thing to note is that because we added the background image in an orthographic view, this won't be visible in perspective view. So for example, if I rotate the image, now we have a perspective view, you can see the background image disappears. That's because Blender assumes if you add this in an orthographic view, that you're only going to want it to be visible in orthographic view, which makes sense for most things like car blueprints. You don't really want these to be visible when you rotate the view like that. But you can change this option, and we will go over that in a little bit. But for the moment, let me select this and press X and delete it. Let me add in a reference image now and show you the difference. So I'll press Shift and A and add in a reference image. We'll add in the same one, original car design side view, and everything looks the same except now this is also visible in perspective view because it's not considered something like a blueprint or anything like that. This is going to be visible from all views and from both sides. And also, another important difference is that if we add in an object, you can see the reference image is displayed like any other object. It can be displayed behind the object, in front of it, or even cutting right through it. Now again, we can change those settings if we want to, so let's get into that now. Let's select the object, and I'll go over to the object data properties right here. So we have some options over here to help us perfect the display of our images. We can enable alpha, which can use any alpha information that's stored in the image, if any, and this also enables us to use this transparency slider here. So if we want to dim something down so it's not quite as obstructive to the view, we can just lower the transparency right there. There are also scale and offset options right here, but again, I'd prefer the hotkeys, pressing G to move it or pressing S to scale it. Now the depth options right here are what's used for occluding. So let me add back in the cube here, and I'll select the image again. Now when the depth is set to default, then the background image is treated like a regular 3D object. It can go behind objects, in front of them, or even through them, depending on its placement in 3D space. Now if we set the depth to front, the background image, or foreground image in this case, will always be displayed in front of the object, no matter what its placement is in 3D space. And the same concept for back. This actually is what creates the background image. The image will always be displayed behind the object, no matter its placement. Now the side option right here just defines which side of this plane the image is displayed on. When it's set to both, then you can see the image on both sides of the plane. And when it's set to front, you can only see it on the front side, not the back side, and same thing with back. You won't be able to see it on the front, but you can see it on the back. Now these two display options down here are very useful as well. If you're using this for blueprints, then blueprints are typically orthographic, like I mentioned, so it makes sense to only display the blueprints when in orthographic view. So for that, we would turn off display perspective. So you won't see the blueprints in perspective view, but if we press numpad 3 for side view, you can see that the blueprints are visible there. Now the grid is showing over the blueprint image, as you can see, and that's because we have use alpha enabled. For some reason, even when transparency is set to 1, those grid lines still show up in front of it. So I'll just turn off use alpha so that we don't have those grid lines going through it. Then down here in the image panel, we can do things like change the image that's displayed. And don't forget, we can add in more than just regular images to the background. You can add in things like image sequences, which are basically animations that are rendered out into individual frames. And we can also add in movie files and also generate our own images like that, which I don't really know why you'd want to do that, but it could come in handy. We'll switch that back and open back up our side image there. Now instead of having to manually add in these images, you can also simply drag and drop images from folders right onto the background of the 3D view, and it automatically adds them in as a background image. So let me select that and let me delete it, and I'll open up the folder that has that image. Let me slide it to the side. Here it is. I'll just click on that and drag it over, and there we go. Now it actually adds that in as a reference image, not a background image, so you can see that it's visible in perspective view. So if you want that to be a background image, then simply disable display perspective and make sure you display this in the back of everything. Now here's a little tip for when you have multiple blueprints that you want scaled the same so that they match in dimensions. For example, let me delete that, and let's say I scaled this up and I moved it on top so that the tires are on top of the green line like that. And let's assume I just scaled this to real life dimensions. So when I add in the other views like front view, I want to make sure that that view also matches these dimensions as well. So for that, we'll just simply duplicate this by pressing Shift and D, and we'll right click to keep it in place. Then I'll press numpad 7 for top view, I'll press R to rotate, and hold Control for snapping and rotate that 90 degrees. So now if I press numpad 3 for side view, we still have that right there. And if I press numpad 1 for front view, we now have this new blueprint object here. So what we do now is just simply change the image that's displayed in front view. And to do that, we go over to the image panel right here, and we want to create an entirely new data block for this blueprint. So we don't want to change the image data down here. We actually want to open up a new image from the top row here. So I'll click on the open button, and we'll open up front view. And there we go. So it keeps the exact dimensions of our side view, but we just change the image that's displayed. So now if I press numpad 3 for side view and numpad 1 for front view, you can see we have our blueprints set up nicely now. Now if you're curious why I changed the image up here instead of down here, that's because up here is actually the information for the data block itself, which can be used by multiple objects. So for example, if I press Shift and D to duplicate this, you can see this data block here now has 2 users. So these 2 objects are using the information contained in this data block. And in fact, although this data block has the image name, we can call this anything we want. So I can click on that and just rename that data block to side view. That's not actually the image path right there. The information for this data block is contained down here. So if I change the image down here, anything using this data block will change as well. So if I click on open and change that to front view, you can see both of these objects here that used this side view data block now changed because we changed this data. So let me switch that back to side view, and I'll click on that, press X and delete it. So that's why we had to use the open button up here to add a new data block in for front view so that it didn't affect the side view. And if that's confusing, I really wouldn't worry about it too much. Just know that when you want to create a new blueprint object that shows its own image, use the open button at the top right here to add in a brand new data block. Now one last tip is that you might want to be able to easily hide these blueprints. So let's add them into a new collection. I'll go into front view, I'll select front view blueprints, then in side view I'll hold Shift, select the side view blueprints, and I'll press the M key and we'll move them to a brand new collection. And we'll call this collection Blueprints. And click OK. So now we've added both of our blueprints into a blueprint collection. So now anytime we want to, we can disable the visibility by using the icon right there. Now these icons are just for visibility in the 3D view over here though. So even if we did have that disabled, those blueprints will still show up in the final render. To disable visibility of an object or collection in the final render, we have to go up into the filters here and enable the camera icon there. And now we can turn off render visibility by turning off the camera there. So now even though we see the blueprints in the 3D view, when it comes to the final render, it won't be visible. And another way to turn off render visibility is to simply disable the collection by turning off the checkbox right there. But then you won't be able to see it in the 3D view either. But either way would work. Now blueprints and some background images are typically something you'd want to keep in place and not be able to select or move around like this. So for that, we'll go up into the filters menu here, enable the selectable toggle, and next to the blueprints collection, we'll just simply turn off selectability. Therefore, we can't select the objects, and that means we also can't move them around. Alright, so I think that covers all the important things about adding in background images, so that's going to do it for this lecture, so I'll see you in the next one. In this lecture, we'll browse through the other selection tools. We already went over the fundamental selection tools earlier on, and those are the ones that you'll use all the time. The other selection tools in this menu right here are a little more circumstantial, though still often useful. And we'll start with select all by type, which is pretty self-explanatory. If I wanted to, say, select all the cameras in my scene, I'll just click on camera, and it selects both of my cameras. And next up we have select active camera, which will select the camera the scene's currently looking through. So it's going to select this one. To see your active camera, you can press numpad 0. Now we're looking through the active camera. And next up we have mirror selection, and you can see in the tooltip this has to do with prefixes and suffixes like .l or .r. So if I select something that's a .l or a left side, then I can mirror select the .r side by clicking this option here. For example, I have an object here called bush.l and an object here called bush.r. So if I want to select the mirror of bush.r, I can go up into the menu, choose mirror selection, and then it selects bush.l. I'm not sure off the top of my head how that option is useful in object mode. I'm sure it is. I just can't give you an example right now. But an option like that could be more handy when working with things like armatures, because you have all the bones on the left side of the body have a suffix like .l, and all the bones on the right side have the suffix .r, so you can mirror select between them, so it might be more useful there. And then next up we have select random. That's just simply going to make a random selection from all the objects in your scene. Alright, and next up we have the select more or less menu here. More or less is actually pretty similar to parent and child, so I'll go over the differences. So let's get rid of everything except our family here. So in this setup here I have the big adult here, the big parent, and all the children are parented to that, except the one on the end here. This child is parented to this one. So if I move this one moves along with it. So we have a hierarchy here. This is a child of this, and these two are children of this. So if I have the parent selected and I want to select the immediate children, up in the menu here we can choose more or less, or use the hotkeys Control, numpad plus, or numpad minus. So if I press Control and numpad plus, it'll select the immediate children, and then if I press Control and numpad minus, it'll deselect one of those children. So we can add or subtract from that immediate children selection using those hotkeys. Now with all of the immediate children selected, if I press Control and numpad plus again, it'll select the children of those children. So at the very least, this hotkey is really useful for immediately selecting the children, just by selecting the parent and pressing Control numpad plus a couple of times, and you'll get all the children. Alright, let me select just the parent again, and back up in this menu, now we have parent and child options here, and also extend parent and child. So we're going to use all these bracket hotkeys right here. So if I have the parent selected and I want to select one of the immediate children, I'll press the right bracket hotkey. It actually selects both of the immediate children. And then if I press the right bracket key again, it's going to select the children of those children. Now I can press the left bracket key to select the parent of that selected child, and then left bracket key again will select the parent of that child, and so on. Now you can see when I press those bracket hotkeys, it doesn't keep everything selected. It just moves on to the next selection. If I wanted to extend the selection, I'll hold Shift and press the right bracket key. And there we go. And now back up in the menu, we'll go over the Select Grouped menu here, which has more parent and children selection options at the top, including siblings, and other types down here. For example, all of these objects are in the same collection called Family. So if I selected one of those objects, and I wanted to select all the objects that are in the same collection, I can go to Select, Select Grouped, and choose Collection. And there we go. Alright, let me unhide the rest of the scene now. Let's go back into the menu, and now we'll go over Select Linked. And from here you can select objects that are linked in various ways. For example, if I select this object and I want to select all the objects that have the same material, I can go to Select Linked and choose Material. And there we go. And finally, we'll go over Select Pattern, which is going to select things based on naming conventions. For example, right here I have an object named Cube, and I have a lot of other objects that start with the word cube. This one right here is cube.002, this one's cube.003, and so on. If I wanted to select all objects that started with the word cube, I can go to Select Pattern, and I'll type in cube with an asterisk at the end, meaning anything can come after that, and then I'll press Enter. And there we go. It selected all objects that started with the word cube. Alright, so that's going to do it for these extended selection tools. So that'll do it for this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one. As of Blender 2.8, there's a new interactive tool for making length and angle measurements, and we can activate that in the left side toolbar right down here. So after activating that, you can simply left click and drag, and it draws a ruler for you and gives you the measurement right in the middle. Now it measures both distance right here, as you can see, and also angles. And to measure angles, you simply left click in the middle of one of these lines. It creates a new point, and then you can just drag that up, and it gives you the angle between these points. Now, how can we make sure we get perfect measurements of something though? Well, we can snap each of these points to things like vertices, edges, or faces. So let's measure some things on the cube right here. I'll left click on this point right there, and then as I'm dragging it, I'll hold the control key for snapping. And you can see it's snapping to the faces, to the edges, and to the vertices. So I'll snap it to that vertex down there, and I'll do the same up here. I'll left click on that and drag it, hold control, and snap it to that corner vertex. And same with this one. Alright, so you can see we've made a perfectly 90-degree measurement right there. And if you want to, you can delete the middle point here and just have it go back to a distance ruler, just by left clicking on it to make sure the middle point's selected, and then press X or the delete key, and that gets rid of that. Now we can go back to measuring distance, so I'll left click on that, hold control, snap it to the bottom just to make sure it perfectly measures it, and it does at 2 meters. Now another cool thing about this ruler is it measures the distance between faces as well. So for example, if we had these two faces here, let me move them a little further apart, and I wanted to measure the distance between them. Well, what I can do is left click on one of the points of the ruler and drag that around. I'll drag it over the face here and hold the Shift key. As you can see, it draws a perpendicular line from the front face and it extends backwards until it meets the next face. And this works even if faces aren't parallel. So I'll left click on that, hold Shift. You can see the distance there is smaller, and as I drag it toward the end, the distance gets larger. So that is a really cool tool to use to measure distance between faces. And that pretty much does it for the basics of using the rulers. You can add multiple rulers too if you need to. And in order to delete a ruler, simply left click on one of the endpoints and that selects the whole line, and then press X or delete and it gets rid of them. You can also switch modes. These are only visible when you're in measurement mode here. But for example, if we went back to select, then they disappear until we go back there. So that's actually pretty handy if you don't want them to be visible all the time. Alright, so that's actually going to do it for this lecture then, and I'll see you in the next one.